Hey, how you doing, Bruce?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm doing really good. Really
Many
good.
years of this. So what's happening in all these years?
Well, the magazine's hanging in there pretty good. We
Yep.
have a dedicated readership. That really helps. They're almost fanatical about picking it up. I don't want to even be late in distribution. Hey, it's really good to see you, Bruce.
Well, I'm glad to be with you again because I so appreciate all the effort you do in helping us evolve and getting the word out.
That's what it's all about. We seem to be all in this together. So
There's nobody that's not.
yeah, yep. So Bruce, when I first read the title of your book, I sort of went, "What?" Like what's Bruce up to now? But then I started reading it, and real quick, like I understood what you were getting at, and it's something that I've touched on myself, and it came from conversations that we had years and years ago about the very beginning, like. Call it God, call it consciousness, the universe, whatever. There seems to be this underlying, almost insatiable need for this consciousness to come into relation, even from the quark level, coming into subatomic particles and atoms forming cells and cells molecules. And that seems to be embedded into our being as we go out into the world. No man is an island. We can't stand it. We can't handle it, And I think the thing I'd like to bring up about you is, one, you've really been an inspiration to me, Bruce, over the years. You're seriously. And for me, you are an imaginal cell, in this body of humanity. And why don't we start out by you explaining what imaginal cells are?
Absolutely. When you undergo a metamorphosis from a caterpillar to a butterfly, both these organisms are made out of cells, and they're essentially they're genetically identical cells, in fact, and yet they have two completely different realities in the physical plane. And what's really interesting about it, more or less connected to the world that we live in, let's step down something that I added in the biology belief a long time ago, and that is this. While we see cells as these little miniatures, microscopic structures and all that, we don't generally connect the fact is this, that almost every cell has every function that's in your body right now. Every cell has a respiratory, digestive, excretory, reproductive, neuroendocrine, even immune system. And the relevance about that is simply this, is that the biology of a cell and the biology of a human are parallel existence, they're fractal images of each other, and they have the same drives, motivations, and behaviors. So coming into understanding about the nature of cells is like you can consider them miniature people because they live in a community, and they all have jobs, and they depend on sharing and doing all that. So now I say, okay, let's go to a caterpillar. Let's say there's 7 billion cells in this caterpillar. All of them have jobs, some of them on the digestive tract, some of them muscles moving the caterpillar around, all different functions. And during the growth of this caterpillar, all the cells are like in an active working mode. Everybody's happy. The economy is booming, taking in food, creating energy, building this thing all up. And as it really gets into maturity, something happens, and that is this. The growth slows down. The growth begins to stop. Now, if you're a cell inside that caterpillar while it was booming, everybody's great. It's like, hey, great economy, everything's wonderful. But as things start to slow down, then all of a sudden it's like, well, if you're a muscle cell and you're not moving, there's a period, well, geez, my job, it's like I'm not doing anything here. And as the food stops coming in, the community starts breaking down. And it starts breaking down, and the structure starts to turn into a soup inside of this caterpillar. Many of the cells actually commit suicide, which in biological terms is called apoptosis. And in this big soupy mess of cells, I'm sure if you were an individual cell, you'd be looking around going, oh my God, the economy's falling apart, people are losing their jobs, the whole world is coming to an end here. And in the midst of all that, like, oh my God, what's happening? A number of cells that are part of the community, genetically identical, but see the world in a different way. respond to the world, and create a structure, an image, which the other cells start to align and form together. And they take the messy, soupy cells solution, and out of that assemble this butterfly, which is the next higher level of evolution of that organism. And why that's relevant is the Earth today is in late caterpillar. We the economies are slowing down. The whole thing is not working right anymore. People are losing their jobs, and everybody's going, and it's like, no, you don't understand. All of this is a necessary part of a metamorphosis to take us from a civilization that is no longer sustainable into a world with a higher level of consciousness, awareness, and appreciation. To do that, then you look around at what's falling down around here, and you see all the structures are falling apart, and a lot of people are going, the thing's falling apart. And I'm going, great. It's right. Great, because if it doesn't fall apart, we're in a worse situation you could ever imagine. Science has already revealed we're going extinct, and that it's human behavior that's undermining the environment and the ecosystems that are precipitating this major extinction process. Human behavior. Einstein's famous quote, you cannot solve the problems with the same thinking that created the problem. And then I said, well, what thinking created the problem? I go, well, educational institutions, religious institutions, government institutions, economic institutions. And I said, well, these are because we've been following their cultural lead, creating a world. Now we come to this dead end that says, if you continue following this lead, extinction's on the wall right now. So what do you have a choice? Continue following the same institutions, which would be stupid, or rebuild the civilization. Well, rebuilding civilization says this. In order to rebuild the civilization, you have to build a foundation that is more in alignment with sustainability. The structures, the institutions we have now are creating the problem. So a very simple reality is, my God, to get from here to success, you actually have to see the breakdown of this caterpillar structure and a reorganization. And where's that? How are we going to go? Where are we going to go? Well, that comes from the so-called imaginal cells, the individuals who are thinking outside the box. Thinking inside the box creates the same problem. Thinking outside the box leads to a resolution. So a lot of outside thinking people, their ideas are becoming more manifest, more real, and more understandable. And the population now has a choice. Follow the old path, let go of the old path, follow the new path. And this is what we're facing at this very minute in time. And the whole relevance about that is what you put your energy into is what you manifest. If you start to put it into a defense of the old system, then you're not living from growth, you're living from a protection posture, and that actually is not survival oriented. What we have to do is not feed the system our energy, because even if it's collapsing and you say, well, I'm going to feed it to, turn it around, you're just throwing, gasoline into a fire at this point. It's like, why are you doing that? The way out is disconnect and create the new community and create the new world, live by the new ideas. And this is what people are doing everywhere. My friend Steve Behrman talks about it. It's called forced simplicity. I think that's what he calls it, something like that. It was like, it's not his desire to become simplified, but it's a necessity because the economic situation and all this. But guess what? As you go into the simplicity, you start to create a more stable, more sustainable world. Right. What you do, which is so important for me, is that you are providing a world with a new blueprint, a new sustainable way of doing this. Now, if you don't do that, then the word doesn't go really far. So you're a very important contributor to our evolution, because the first thing is we must get a new understanding into the world, because the old understanding is self-destructive. And the new understanding is, we can collectively, we can do far better than anything that's going on right now. So I like what Lewis Thomas used to write about, the lives of the cell and all that. And one of the people that was inspired by Lewis Thomas was Ken Carey. And Ken Carey wrote Starseed Transmissions and quite a few books, but he talks about islands of the future. And an island of the future is small conscious communities that
congregate around a central principle of bringing in higher frequency information that normally isn't readily available to the mundane worker down at the factory because they're so busy, just raising kids and paying bills. But this higher frequency energy that's coming in needs to be translated and brought down to a verbal level to where it can be understood. And I think that's the importance of independent media, books like yourself, because it's reaching people on a heart-to-heart level, but it's reaching them linguistically through words and concepts they can understand. Because, let's face it, most people don't understand string theory and like all these amazing things that are going on, not because they don't want to or they can't. It's just they have so much on their plate right now. And just to give them a little spark of understanding is like a seed that I can see it in people. It's growing and growing and growing.
Yeah.
And even in the media now, I'm starting to see there's a change of events. Before it was like, okay, we can fix this. The Republicans can do it. No, the Democrats can do it. Now it's getting to the point, at least to the point to where they're going, I don't know.
Yeah.
Because actually we've created a systemic problem that is so complex, and it's like we built this building, and the only way the building can survive is to keep making it taller, through commercialism and consumerism and ravaging and pillaging our resources. And nobody's really paid attention until recently that the foundation was only meant for a 2-story building. And now we're up there and the building is shaking, and there's no way we can fix it. We have to let it collapse.
Absolutely.
And start over.
And that's why we should eliminate the concept of fear, because most people look at the structure and say, I am that structure, and oh my God, the structure's falling apart. Then that means me. And it's like, no, this means you step outside the structure, you find that island, and you're like an epicenter for such an island in regard to get this information out to people, because it's not forthcoming from the institutions for a very simple reason. The institutions are flawed. And their own survival is in jeopardy. So now they're out for themselves, not for us. They're taking care of themselves. So the healthcare industry is making lots of money, but it's not taking care of anybody, really. It's just making money. Education is charging tremendous amount of money, and then the students come out of school, they got no place to go anyway. And all of a sudden you realize, well, they're there not to help the students. They're there to keep the thing going. Government is there for itself. And this happens, it's a very fundamental, simple principle, actually. Any organization that starts out helping people, that's the mission. And then it starts to grow because it's a very important mission. And the bigger it gets, then all of a sudden, well, now we have to put a little structure behind this thing. It's a little too big. And so the structure starts growing. And then all of a sudden, well, then the effort of the people that had the original mission is not just to do the mission, but now it's to support the structure that's being built. At some point, the structure gets so big, top-heavy, as you mentioned,
right,
that more effort goes into keeping the structure alive than what was its original design for. The idea to help people? No, it's not. No, it's not. Academics is not to help people. Academics is to make a profit. Then they measure college of efficiency and effectiveness. How much money did they make? It's like, when the hell did a college become the concept of a money-making source? Healthcare. When did that get better? Well, who cares? As long as they're making money, nobody cares whether you're getting better or not. We're making money. And so the church, hey, Mother Teresa's out in the street trying to help people. And the Pope is in this giant structure saying, hey, we got to pay the rent on this giant structure. And so the work of Mother Teresa is second to the primary work of keeping the structure alive. Well, every institution that has started out to help us has now moved in that direction. So basically it says, okay, forget those institutions because they forgot the mission. And the mission is to help humanity. Now it's to help individuals. So it's like, time for a change.
Yeah, I was just reading a couple of weeks ago the disparity between hospitals. If you have a heart attack and go in for treatment at a hospital in Arkansas, it's $3,600 for their whole treatment for a heart attack. If you go into a hospital in Arizona, it's $91,000. So it's completely ridiculous to even think that this is evolving
Oh,
with the essence of helping people. It's about making money.
absolutely. You know, and the biggest one is the cancer industry. And it's an industry. It has nothing to do with helping patients. They're still using, think of how many billions of dollars have gone into cancer research. And I say, and what technique are we using on cancer patients? I say, the exact same thing we did in 1930. We gave them radiation, we gave them chemotherapy, and we did surgery. I say, has this changed? The answer is no. I say, how many hundreds of billions of dollars have they taken in and are still asking to take in, and how many people have they helped? The death rate for cancer is the same now as it was for 80 years. And the fact is this, it hasn't changed, but the money end of the system is fabulous. So their mission to help people is now no mission to make money. And if I have this soapbox moment here,
Absolutely.
Basically, let's give a simple fact. There's a word humane, which is the root for human and humanity and all that. And what is humane? First definition is compassion, the compassion for others. So I say, is medicine humane? And I'm going to have to absolutely say, absolutely not. Medicine by definition is inhumane. I say, what do you mean inhumane? I go, well, is this function to help people? I go, yeah, which people? The shareholders in the companies. I say, well, wait a minute. Then the medicine today is to make money for shareholders. It is, right? So I go, well, wait, how do you make money? I say, well, you charge more than the services cost, and the extra goes to the profits. Then I say, well, wait, now let's look at this. A person is sick, and you're going to be compassionate by doing what? You're going to help them, but you're going to charge them a fee. I say, you're going to charge them a fee to be compassionate? It's like, and then all of a sudden it's like, now you're not compassionate. Now you're profit motivated. And so the whole idea is this. Is the health industry there for the people? And the answer is no. The only people it's there for are the shareholders, not for the sick people. They're sick, and what does the health community do? Kick them while they're down. Well, 60% of bankruptcies in the United States today, 60% are due to people who can't afford health care bills. And it's like, you mean you could lose your life, your house, everything you owned in the world, everything you saved up 50, 60 years for, and then you can lose that in a couple of months with giving it to the medical people, and you call that humane? It's like, that is inhumane. Let's label it and say, if you want to make it humane, how are you going to do it? And the answer is this. Cut the damn profit out of health care, because profit is contrary to humanity. And there's no way out but to let the damn system fall, and which is great, because the whole reason is this: when you can't afford health care, then you start to realize maybe I better take care of myself. And this is what the whole lesson is. We don't need them. There was no medical profession here for 1,000,000 years while people were walking on this planet, and they survived damn well enough, you know. And everybody says, yeah, but and this is one of those assumptions that is so false. They say, oh, but look what healthcare has done for us and how healthy we are now and all that. And it's like, healthcare didn't do that for us. What did that for us was nutrition and sanitation. Nutrition and sanitation is why we are thriving today. Healthcare is not responsible for that at all, and yet they take all the credit, and they talk about the longevity that has happened. And the fact is this: the only increase in longevity is due to the fact that fewer young people are dying, because now we can take care of them better and we can nourish them and all that. So it's not that we're living any longer. People have always lived to 90 and 100 years of age. That's always been that way. When they say, yeah, but the lifespan's increased, I go, what does the lifespan increase represent? I said, well, first of all, you take everybody who dies at whatever age they die, and you take all the ages, add them up, and then you make an average. Yeah, but a while back, it was the young people were dying like crazy. Right. The young people. So you take, let's say, a 100-year-old guy and a kid that dies at 1, you put the two together, and I say, what's the average lifespan? The average lifespan is 50 years of age.
Right.
It's like, no, that's because the young guy died. That doesn't count. And so the whole idea is this: we have not increased our longevity. Matter of fact, we're actually in the process of decreasing it. The only reason it appears to be increased is fewer young people are dying, which have the age. Every time a young person dies, man, you cut it in half essentially. So you get rid of the aspect of young people dying fast, and all of a sudden we're back at they say we've increased the lifespan. I say no. People are still 90 and 100 years old. They've always been that way, and actually probably lived a lot longer, except for the stresses of the world, because then we come to a simple conclusion. I'm sorry I'm ranting on this.
No,
but,
it's good.
The conclusion is simply this, is that it's established fact that 90% of doctor visits are due to stress. And so the fact is this: we're not weak and frail and vulnerable as they have us believe with all the advertisements that you need to, to strengthen your life. You were already strong. The only thing that weakened it is the stress. And then I go, and guess what? They know that. And that's why we get sold stress every minute of the day. And I say, well, what's the consequence of stress? And this is profoundly important. Especially, first I'll give a quote from Tony Benn, Member of Parliament in London, Liberal. I think it's a quote from a movie, Sicko, by Michael Moore, which is a great movie. And Tony Benn simply said, as a politician, he said, governments do not want a healthy, intelligent population because they are difficult to control. Right. And then I go, ever since he even said that back when Sicko first came out, and I look at the continued degradation of the United States, I'll give you two profound facts. Number one, we are one of the sickest nations in the world today, paying the most money and not getting anything. Number two, we are becoming one of the least intelligent nations in the world today. And it's shocking. It's just shocking. For example, they looked at the 43 top nations of the world and said, what percent of the population believes in evolution? It turned out the United States was number 42 out of 43. Turkey was the only one that had fewer people believe in evolution than the United States. And what does that mean? It's like we become sicker, and we are now obviously less intelligent. And I say, well, guess what? We're right in the game plan.
Yep.
It's playing out. It's just going right now. Yeah, we are not intelligent, and we are sick, and we are being manipulated by the government. And it's not the government, and I don't really want to say that because then people go, oh, you're against the government. It's not, I'm not against the government. I'm against the corruption government. If it wasn't corrupt, it would work right. If it's corrupt, you can have all the right rules and laws, but it will do nothing. And the world we're facing today is a corruption of government, and then we blame the government, and everybody said, let's get rid of the government. It's like, no. Get rid of the people that you put in there. Right. Being paid. And the clearest example of that is like hit you in the face, slap you, wake you up phone call was 95% of Americans wanted gun control with background checks, and Congress voted it down. Now that's the biggest, slap in your face for what? Congress is supposed to represent the people of the United States. Well, if 95% of the people want something and Congress votes it down, then the clearest truth and right in your face is they do not represent the people of the United States. So it's a part of the system that has to collapse.
And most of us don't want to go to war either. And just to touch on the medical thing again, there's something that is sort of a dark secret that people don't like to look at, but the medical profession doesn't make any money on two groups of people. The first group is the healthy group. They don't make any money on the healthy group, and they don't make any money if you're dead. So they sort of like to keep you right in the middle, in this area where they're not preventing you from being healthy, but they're not causing you to be completely dead either. And this,
they're doing this with a lot of knowledge. This is very important. This is not a coincidence and an accident. Like, hey, how come we have so much corn syrup out there? The fact is, I'll give you a scientific reality. It's a fact of science. It's a fact. When you compare the neurological activity, you train rats and you give them regular sugar, or you give them corn syrup, and then you train them. They found that corn syrup impairs short-term memory and learning. And this is like, well, isn't that the world we live in today where you're drinking 10 cans of Coca-Cola in one day and you don't know what the hell you did that day? Right. And the fact is, they know that this is happening. They know genetically modified agricultural crops are destructive of not just the environment, but the people who eat the crops, like us, which I don't, of course, and you don't. And the reality is why? Because food modifies our own genetics. What we eat modifies our genetics. And when you start changing the genetics of your body using, Frankenstein food there, you don't realize what the problems are. Well, now we're beginning to realize what the problems are. Health is profoundly declining. Intelligence profoundly declining. The characters of our sustainability totally declining. And people like Monsanto have excuse me, I have to say it, the balls to tell us that they're trying to help me. It's like, give me a break, folks.
And they're like going through a revolving door through our government at high-level institutional posts, and they're supposed to be watching out for our food, our health, and they're past executives of Monsanto. I mean, how's that? And I think this is a mistake that we're making, Bruce. Is we say our government, but first it's not our government, and second, it's not a government. It's a corporate-run agenda from these big, huge multinational corporations that have no allegiance to any country whatsoever. And
no morality. There's no morality for a corporation. So that means they're free to operate at any level without judging themselves as being moral or immoral, because there is no standard of morality for a corporation. Well, there are for people, which is interesting. Right. People have to live by this moral thing. Corporations, free to act in any way they feel like. As long as they're making a profit, then they're succeeding in the mission statement of a corporation, a profit for shareholders.
Yeah, I've heard a few corporate executives speak out and say, the corporation is making decisions that we as human beings would not want to make. But the way it's set up and all that, And sometimes I wonder, Bruce, like, are there people on this planet that actually genetically lack the ability to feel compassion and empathy? Are we dealing with something that is a sick part of the genetic bloodline?
Unfortunately, I don't believe that. Unfortunately, I believe it's all programming. Yeah. We come in as genetic automatons. We are biological machines. Yes, the genes control. Here's your body. You got 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes. You got a mechanism, connect all the parts. What you do with that mechanism, that's not genetically put in there, because organisms must continuously adapt to an environment. So I can't pre-program your behavior. I have no idea what's going to happen in the world. So basically, I leave program. Here's a robotic device. How is it going to work? I say, well, there's instincts that gets us off the ground, but everything after that is programming by family, community, and culture. And the relevance about that is very important, because as culture changes over time, we can adjust and modify our lives. But you can't do it through genetics. So genetics is just saying, no, I got a biology. I have a drive to stay alive. Now, the programs that do that, I'm going to acquire. And the acquisition of those programs, as we talked about a long time ago when we got started, was basically through child conscious parenting, or unconscious parenting, as the case may be, because the child is downloading behaviors for the first 7 years. So those corporate executives, they came from a background that acknowledged, hey, you're free to do what you want. It's a Darwinian world, It's like, hey, so who cares if the 6 million people are dying of hunger in Africa? That's Darwin, It's just that they're not fit. And it's like, this is so much BS. That stands for belief system. This is so much belief that Darwinian theory is like, acknowledges that a struggle for survival is inherent in a way of life, and that there are the fittest and the less fit, and they compete, and as long as the fittest wins, then they won the game. But the science talks about this very interestingly. They talk about an end, survival, and I say, well, what is the means to that end? They go, that's not our job, survival. So how can you survive? Well, you can be intelligent like Albert Einstein. That'd be a great survival tool. Or you could be some jerk with an AK-47 and kill Albert Einstein. You win. Right. And all of a sudden, there's an end, but no means. Science doesn't offer a means. And the absence of that means is then a free-for-all. that says, I don't care what it takes to win the game, I am entitled by Darwinian law to be the winner if I succeed, which then throws this game open to kill your neighbor before they kill you, and the struggle and the fight, when it turns out there is a means to the end, and science hasn't been able to get it out to the public. And the idea is this, and you brought it up, it's the islands of the communities. It's community is how you get to that end. And if you break down community, then you have broken down the structure, and then you look at the world we live in and recognize that has been the underlying invisible aim. And you could see the resolution of it was what? Break community. Why? When you break community, people have no power.
Which means you're breaking relationships.
Oh, absolutely. Not just relationships between people that know each other, but relationships in the family are now fundamentally broken down. Well, once you break down, that's the last part of the community. If there's no family, there is no community.
Yeah, I remember what happened to my family personally when my mother had to go to work. Our family integration started disintegrating right before my eyes. I mean, I had no parenting at a particular point because both parents were working and so busy. You know, let's look at the fractal patterns for a second and use it to extrapolate out. Now, if you use fractal patterns coming all the way up through relationships to right now, it's obviously important right now as we build our relationships. And I really love what you and Margaret was writing about in your book, because Dara and I have a really close relationship too. And I've actually used that relationship. When I first met her in Brazil, I seen right away that this is going to take me being more than I am to make this work. And I used it as a stepping stone out of myself, out of my ego, my personality, out into the universe to take a deep introspective look at myself without fear, you know, because I was in love with this person that was reflecting me. But I'm off track there a little bit. But let's look at fractal patterns, and because I think that we're being observed by very advanced beings in consciousness. And I think as a planet, we need to come together and solve some of these problems before we're going to be welcomed out into the galactic community.
Absolutely.
So what do you think, if you would extrapolate this out, what does this mean with our relationship to other planets and other beings and a more advanced consciousness?
We're in a state of evolution. We're like in a developing fetus. It goes through all these different stages. At first, it looks like a fish, and then it has a little bit more of a reptilian embryo-like, and we're moving up through the stage of creating in the development from one shape to another shape to another shape until we evolve. We are in a final, I believe, evolution metamorphosis, where we're leaving behind a pattern, which is a built-in pattern to nature, and that's where fractals become so important. Fractals, number one, are mathematics that emphasize as above, so below, because they emphasize the reiteration of basic patterns at any level of the organization. So the pattern above, the pattern below, it's all going to be the same. So that's number one. So it says the patterns in life are fractal, and then that we get to from an understanding of the geometry. And people say, "What geometry? What are you talking about?" I go, geometry is structure in space. You want to put nature in space? It's a structure. It has to fit in space. Well, when you're going to do geometry, the most efficient geometry to put a structure in space is fractal geometry. So, and it turns out that the character of nature is fractal with repetitive patterns. And we're coming out of an evolution sequence. Now, here's the evolution. We focus on the individual. That's a Darwinian kind of belief, you know. Oh, right. Darwin, survival of the fittest. I don't care about the other guy. And the idea was this was never part of our evolutionary scheme. It has become a philosophical point which people try to live up to and justify an upper class and a lower class. That's what Darwin did. Matter of fact, the real theory of evolution came from Alfred Russel Wallace, and actually even more fundamental, that was Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. He was the first one, okay? Alfred Russel Wallace was a commoner. You say, well, who the hell is Alfred Russel Wallace? Say, well, he was the one who wrote Theory of Evolution. I go, where did Darwin come from?
Right.
Well, Darwin was working on a theory of evolution. Alfred Russel Wallace wrote a theory of evolution and sent it to Darwin. Excuse me. And he asked Darwin, he said, if you think this is a good idea, why don't you, bring it to the Royal Society and, let's publish it. Well, Darwin got that paper from Alfred Russel Wallace and freaked out because he thought he was going to be the evolutionary scientist of the world. He didn't have it worked out, but Alfred Russel Wallace did. Well, when Darwin received this paper and he brought it to the head of the Royal Society, who was his guru, his mentor, Charles Lyell. And Charles Lyell was the guy who discovered geology, that the Earth evolved. And that's why he took Darwin under his shoulder and said, under his wing, and said, okay, the Earth evolved, maybe people evolved. So why don't you work on that? Well, Darwin was working on it, but never had the answer. Alfred Russel Wallace shows up with a problem. Alfred Russel Wallace is a commoner. And the concept in Victorian England that a commoner would come up with a theory of evolution was like, this cannot be. So they worked out an arrangement, Darwin and Charles Lyell and a botanist, Joseph Hooker, called the delicate arrangement.
And it was.
And it worked, and it delicately put Darwin's name first. And while they published the article later from Wallace, Darwin immediately went to work, wrote the book, The Origin of Species. Well, Wallace didn't have any idea what the hell was going on. He was over in Indonesia. And so, but why was it so important for Darwin to write the theory? And here's the point. Victorian England had an upper class and a lower class. Darwinian theory, and here's what's interesting. The emphasis of Wallace's theory is elimination of the weakest. Darwin's theory is survival of the fittest. You say, well, that half glass is half empty, half full. I go, no, it's profoundly different. Darwin's theory emphasized the legitimacy of an upper class ruling a lower class. It said that we are the fittest, we are where evolution comes from, you're a feeder layer. You're just there to do the work. You don't do anything with evolution. So we justify it with an upper class. Alfred Russel Wallace was a commoner, couldn't do that. But the whole switching of the round of the upper class lording it over is survival of the fittest, not elimination of the weakest. This justifies their expression of, yes, I am allowed to be fitter than you, and I am important, and you're not. And they did all this. And I say, think about the difference if Wallace prevailed over Darwin. Because I say, you have a choice to live in two worlds. You can live in one of this one, A or B. And I say, A world based on the survival of the fittest. B, a world based on the elimination of the weakest. Would there be a difference? The answer is, you bet your life there'd be a difference. Why? It's a hell of a lot easier to live in a world to not be the weakest than it is to live in a competitive, backbiting world to be the fittest. So we have chosen that one, and that is the foundation of competition, cutting each other down, destroying the structure, and losing the vision.
Yeah,
because the evolution is,
it worked out great for the British Empire for a few years.
And it worked, and it was really great because the U.S. had its foundation in a completely different belief system. It was based on a deist belief system, which was God and nature are one and the same. Study nature, you understand God. And Darwin's theory was based on we're dominant, we control, and we can make what we want. And so screw what nature wants, what do we want? And that's like, oh, you stepped out of the bounds. And when the U.S. started, it was in the right place. But shortly, by the time the Civil War, which coincidentally, which is not a coincidence, the Civil War and Darwinian theory came out at exactly the same time.
You know what I'm thinking, Bruce, is you have a saying in your book about positive thinking versus bad vibrations. And I think that's an important aspect, too, right now in this crazy world we live in, because one of the conflicts I have with my spiritual community friends is think positive, and sort of turn a blind eye to everything else. And I say, no, we're looking for a balance of consciousness. I very seldom use a religious metaphor, but it's like believe in Allah, but tie up your camel first. It's like we have to pay attention to our gut feelings.
Yes.
And we can't just blindly sort of think positive about everything. What do you have to say about that?
It's absolutely true. There's a very interesting point that you brought that up for a very simple reason. It's like when we were talking to humans, I could give a value to this and I could give a value to that, okay? And then we're saying, okay, we're moving by these values. And I say, well, wait, look, there are a lot of organisms that don't have human consciousness, but they are here. They have survived through everything. They have adapted and modified and adjusted. How did they do that? And the answer is this: because nature has built every organism with something called the biological imperative. The biological imperative is the drive to survive. Every organism has that, even though biologists have no idea where the hell that comes from and where it's programmed into the system. I'll just give you an example. You try to kill a bacterium. It's not going to sit there and say, okay, go ahead and kill me. It'll try to do everything to stay alive. So from the most primitive organism, there's a survival thing going on, okay? Well, this whole survival thing is, how do you teach a primitive organism which way to go, which behavior to take, which way, what should do? And the answer is this: nature helps out. Nature helps out by releasing chemistry that when the organism is making the right behavior, it releases a chemistry of pleasure. And when the organism is going on a wrong turn and threatening its survival, it releases a chemistry of pain or discomfort, And so why is this important? There's no school for lower organisms, but there is a biological imperative and a director that says when these feelings come in your body, when these sensations are coming in, read them. If they're positive, keep moving in that direction. If it becomes negative, move the opposite direction. And this is fundamental to our reality. So, yeah, there's a visceral gut feeling that corresponds with your biological imperative. And it's reading the environment right now. What's interesting is most people have read this environmental upheaval coming for a while, but they didn't read it consciously. They read it in the pit of their stomach. Something's wrong. Isn't that right? It's the vibrations. It's like what you were reading is the release of chemistry from the nervous system that is reading the vibration saying, your survival is threatened. And that's why we were being motivated. You got to do something here. Now, a lower organism doesn't sit down like you and I and discuss the situation. They just go into action and do this. But we have to discuss the situation because we also have programs that completely conflict with our own survival. That
right.
And the idea is this. Now we're trying to balance the program in our head with a gut feeling. And the fact is this. Go back to the gut feeling. It is more primitive, more primal, and more direct in telling you whether you're doing something right or you're doing something wrong. And when people would understand that, we wouldn't be finding ourselves always in the wrong place, because as you're starting to go to the wrong place, your biology would say, this isn't right, it's bad vibes. And that's the vibes that tell us, are you going the right way or going the wrong way?
And I think this also brings up the importance of dealing with and processing unfounded fears, because that would interfere with the vibration that you're feeling. It could misread, misinterpret.
Absolutely. We've been programmed to misread the environment. Why? Because of manipulation. I'll give you a simple point. It's like, I say, look, biologically, simple fact, we are all equally powerful creators. I say, well, how can we be equally powerful? Look at Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, and they must be more powerful than I am. Look at what they got. Look at all the power they got. I say, where did they get all that extra power from? And that's the joke. The joke is this. They didn't get extra power. In the process of eliminating our power, we have weakened them ourselves, and they have strengthened themselves.
Right.
And so through the process of disempowering the public, the few that retain that knowledge of power seem to be profoundly powerful, when we are exactly as powerful as that, but we don't believe it.
Well, we've been
the population. Yeah,
we've been indoctrinated by our institutions, organized religion. Even the reason I wrote the first book I wrote was the 12 Spiritual Laws of Recovery, and the reason I wrote it is because the kids nowadays, they're not going for the first step where they're giving their power over, and they said, "I admit I am powerless." Every kid that was going through the recovery home that I was being a counselor at said, heck no, except in different words, I'm not powerless. I'm not going to give my power over to this 12-step organization. So my first step was, what you resist persists.
Yes.
And embracing addiction as a transformative tool. But churches and governments, they have got us so used to giving our power away, and we become welfare recipients and on all kinds of whatever plans to where we don't have to work, our medicine is taken care of, everything's taken care of. And I think we need to get back to the point to where we claim our power back as very powerful spiritual beings. And then, again, this is getting into relationships, our relationship to ourself as a spiritual being.
This is, to get off the ground, and the book, The Honeymoon Effect, I'm so glad you looked at it, and I hope it was entertaining as well as
it was. Actually, it was actually heartwarming because it was so much of what I'm going through personally with my wife, Dara. We use our relationship as a touchstone for almost everything we do. If it makes our relationship come out of sync, then we take a look at it, because we know our relationship is the true test of gold, or whatever it is that we're using it as a touchstone for.
Absolutely. And that you can't build a community if you can't find a relationship with another person and create this with one other person starting to get off the ground to go to communities. Like you can't get there from here unless you know how to create the relationship first. Yeah. And so and it's real interesting because it's really irritates me that the Jesuits have known for 500 years how to disempower you, because they would claim, give me a child until it's 6 or 7 and it will belong to the church for the rest of its life. We only know today that the first 7 years of a child's life is programming, and that programming will actually manifest because our conscious mind defers to the program 95% of the time. And they were the first ones that know, look, if I program this child, I don't care what their wishes and desires are going to be, they're going to be a member of that church forever. Well, I go, they boasted about the fact that I can manipulate and control your life with that first 7 years programming. And then I go, so you think, over 500 years, that simple fact may have gotten lost. And I go, are you kidding me? They know how to do it much better now than they used to do it before.
Actually, it was a Jesuit priest, Voltaire. It was a quote that he made that made me start thinking, that caused me to write the second book about the consequences and the social and neurological consequences of belief systems. Voltaire said, and he sort of said this on the sly to the public, like, hey, if they can make you believe in absurdities, they can make you commit atrocities. And I started thinking, how could that possibly be? But it is. If you go onto any battlefield and ask a person, what is your belief? And get them to put their gun down for a second, I guarantee you they're going to have some absurd belief in the afterlife or whatever. Nationalism is just as dangerous. Anytime we separate ourselves with a belief, it doesn't take much for us to get polarized against us and them. And if it's an absurd belief, it's even worse, because now you have to cut yourself off from logic, rationalism, science, biology, archaeology, Earth's history, human history, because for that belief to be held, it has to be believable.
Yeah.
And there goes the filters. All the filters start going up, filtering out anything that might conflict with that previously held belief.
And there we go. Now we're living in the world called the Matrix. And this is it's funny because I try to tell people, I say, you want to go see that movie, if you go in the movie store, you look for it under science fiction. And I go, well, actually it's a documentary. Right. It's that we have been programmed, and when we take the red pill and we get out of that program, there's a different world. And the Honeymoon Effect book, which you just held up, is an expression of exactly that. Falling in love for a period of time is like taking the red pill, because you get out of your programming. And I say, well, what was the consequence of your experience when you got out of the program? You say, I was in love. I had this honeymoon, heaven on earth. Life was beautiful. I go, and when did that disappear? It's like when the programs kick back in again, the honeymoon disappeared. And I go, Well, there's the proof. All the proof you need in the world is time to take the red pill, baby.
Yeah.
Because if the red pill leads you to the honeymoon and to heaven on earth, then by all means, that is a necessary time. Meaning, get out of the programming, because the programming was to disempower us, and it has been very, very, very effective.
Yeah, we've even made a cliche about the honeymoon is over. And accepted that as a transitional part of a relationship.
Yeah, I'm not into that anymore, man. I'm 17 years in honeymoon with my partner Margaret, and I just love it because every day we wake up and it's like, in truth and reality for us, my God, another day in heaven on earth, and we are creating this. And we did not have this as our original part of our lives. This is the part that said, how did we learn to get out of the program? Recognize the program and get out of the program. The moment we started to get out of the program, there were freedom and happiness and health that has come into our lives. And this is what everyone needs to do, is take back your power. And then you go, well, what's power? I go, knowledge is power. And I go, and what has been missing, and what you and I have been working on getting out to the public, is an understanding of self-knowledge about yourself. Why? Because that, by definition, is self-empowerment. And they have been keeping us from the knowledge of who we are long enough to disempower us. And now this new knowledge comes out and said, no, you are a creator. You created heaven on earth when you had a honeymoon, and you could have that every day of your life if you understood the only reason you lost it is you got back into the program again.
There's a saying that the beginning of a wave waking up and becoming enlightened is to realize that it's made of water and is part of an ocean. Do you think the beginning of us waking up is realizing that we're part of a larger humanity, like Peter Russell talks about the global brain?
Absolutely.
Do you think
this is an absolute fact? It's an absolute fact that, well, we see ourselves as individuals and have, gone in that direction, especially in a Darwinian belief system that recognizes that's the important way. It turns out, no. Humans are cells in the body of a superorganism called humanity. So while we look at the individuals, it's sort of like go to an ant colony, take an ant out, and say, is this an individual unit? And I go, no. You know why? Take the ant out of the colony, put it in by itself, it will die. It only lives because it's part of a community of all the other ants. So you take that ant out of the community, it no longer is viable. We have been evolving, and the evolution is toward community. And the significance about that is when we're not in a community, we're already failing. And that's why the future says the first thing is get this community going. Why? Because when you recognize, look, a human being is not a single entity. A human being is 50 trillion cells living in a vast community with abilities and comprehension far beyond humans. Why? They got 50 trillion cells living in harmony. Every cell's got a job. Every cell's got health care. Every cell's got protection. Every cell gets food delivered. It's like, come on, man, 50 trillion cells. And we got 7 billion people. We can't figure it out. But the fact is this. When we start to recognize that we're not individuals like an individual ant, we are part of a community, a super community called humanity, that each one of us is a cell in a body larger than us. The idea of killing each other all of a sudden takes a whole different point. It's like, well, that would be called autoimmune disease, self-destruction. I go, yeah, precisely. This is the fate or status of humanity at this moment. We are self-destructive. We are autoimmune. We're killing ourselves. and why? Because we haven't recognized that we are all one community of humans. And this is a requirement because this is the evolution. If we do not get there, then we don't have a voice as an entity. And this is why the difficulty of trying to communicate with extraterrestrials. It's sort of like, okay, you have a fetus developing in you. And I say, okay, go talk to the 10 trillion cells and talk to them. It's like, oh, they're not listening to me.
Right.
It's like, yeah, of course not. It's not the cells. It's the community that talks, not the individual cell. And we are humans as cells, but we haven't fully realized the community. So extraterrestrials are hovering around thinking, hey, birth is imminent, but it's also could die. Know. And so we are at a stage, are we going to be born or are we going to die? And the answer is, are we going to make community or are we going to continue this separation phase and compete with each other and destroy the world in the process. Well, that's the decision at this moment and this time right now, and that's why it's so important for myself and for yourself.
Yeah,
and this work.
And
it's a judgment. It's a moment of judgment now. This is what.
And it's a pivotal point in humanity and for the earth too, but especially in our continued survival, because once we can become one planetary consciousness, one planetary voice, it's at that point that we can start communicating with other advanced civilizations and become part of a higher cosmic solar consciousness, which actually is the next step to becoming a galactic consciousness, and on and on and on we go. But we're like at a pivotal point in our evolutionary of consciousness here.
And this is important because the audience that we really need to be talking to are what are called the millennial generation, which is the post-baby boomer generation. That's people 40 years old and younger. And the reason why is because this is a generation that is not going to continue with the same story from the previous one. And the recent election, which really irritated the Republicans, because in their mind it's like, oh, we know what's really going on. And all of a sudden all these young people start to vote and they say, I don't care about your politics. I don't care about your view on women. I don't care about your view on sexuality. It's not us. We are the internet-connected community. Well, the internet-connected community means a connection of all these cells coming into one, and
right.
They represent that evolution. And it's interesting because most of them are going, holy crap, I can't get a job. I can't support myself. I don't know what I'm going to do and all this stuff. Well, the fact is that you're the first ones who are going to have to live in a community, which they do. 4 or 5 people live in a house. Why? Because they can't afford to do it alone, and they're creating community. And the relevance about all this is they are not following a lot of the beliefs that have separated us from the past. And they represent this future thinking. And while they're going, woe with me, they don't recognize it. Their disconnect from the structure is the primary reason for the falling of the structure. You can only have a structure if everybody holds on to it and says, keep that structure. And they're going like, hey, the stock market crashes, and you go like, oh yeah, like I own a stock, like who cares, right? They don't give a damn. Well, that's great, because they're the ones that can step outside the box. They're not captive of the box. They don't care.
And plus they're realizing too that the whole stock exchange, everything, it's a big Ponzi scheme.
Absolutely.
The biggest Ponzi scheme, that and the Federal Reserve. So this is the advantage of having a well-informed citizenry. If we can get really well-informed and, like you say, start unplugging from the system here and there and just stop supporting it. It doesn't have to be an outer revolution. It's a revolution of mind, of thought, of consciousness.
Yeah.
And as we stop supporting the delusion of the American dream, the global policies that are happening, their only power is the power that we give them. And I think they're realizing that too. And one by one, we're starting to realize this also. I know we're looking around for a conscious community, maybe 3 or 4 families, get on a small piece of land and start living really sustainable with as less of a footprint as possible. Right now, we live at a place, we have wind turbines and solar panels. I have a garden out back, and it's a pretty good place to be. It'd be nice if we could get 3 or 4 more families and really make it into a sustainable place.
This is what Margaret and I just did in New Zealand. We bought into a piece of property with 4 other couples, and the whole idea is it's organic. We're going to make it self-sustaining. We're going to live in harmony with the land, in harmony with each other, and support each other, and we can grow our own stuff if we wanted, and all that stuff. And this, again, what you're doing, what we're doing here, is part of, yes, how are you going to survive when the structure falls? And the answer is through community. And if you don't have a community, you're in a lot of trouble. And so we're being pushed to form that community, and that is the evolution that is really right in front of us right now. So this is very critical for all of us to catch on. It's like the way out is not to follow the path, but to create the new path. Right. And this is all of our effort right now.
Well, I'll tell you something that Richard Feinberg, he wrote a book called The End of Growth, Peak Oil, Peak Everything. He's this really good financial expert that is really working towards sustainability. I mean, his home, he's been there for 10 years. It looks like a tropical paradise out back with fruit trees, and he's walking his talk. He came here to Chico and gave a talk over at the university. It is a really good lecture, powerful lecture about the true state of affairs. And like you said, to figure out how long the financial system is going to work, all you need is a calculator. It's not rocket science. It can't. There's not been one fiat system that's ever worked in the history of the planet. And after the lecture, he was opening up for questions, and this girl student raised her hands, and she said, well, what classes should we take here to prepare for the future? And he looks around a little conspiratorial and he says, well, I hate to say this. I mean, I'm at a university, but I have to be honest with you. There's not one class in this whole university that is going to prepare you for the world that's coming. You need to learn how to grow food, get close to water, learn a trade where you can barter back and forth, learn some skills, and get involved in a small community within a larger community that is of this mindset. And
that's it.
Yeah, I mean, that was from a person who really has been looking at this deeply.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Well, Bruce, how would you like to end this, especially in the relationship area, you know? Like, what is it that you think is holding us back? Because, like you said, if you can't make your own relationship work, I mean, how are we going to stop war in the Middle East?
Right.
With people we don't even believe the same? If we can't get along together, is this where Psyche comes in a little bit?
Well, so it basically says this: where do the problems come from? And the problem doesn't come from consciousness for a simple reason. When anybody has fallen in love, and what the new book is really emphasizing is that the way you did that is you got out of the programming and you started creating from your personal wishes and desires and your aspirations. And all of a sudden, when two people are working together to create that together, they manifest heaven on earth. But when the beliefs start to come back in from the programs, then all of a sudden that starts to disappear. What we're all seeing, again, is it's a true story of the Matrix. And it says that you got to get out of this programming of your vulnerability, your frailty, your powerlessness. This has been put upon us to manipulate us. And yet we are so powerful. And why is that important for me? Because, look, if I could get the population to turn around and say, look, why don't you create a honeymoon effect? And everybody started creating a honeymoon effect. They were all living heaven on earth. And by definition, heaven is what earth becomes. Is when we give the power to those few people and say, you make the decision and I'll sit here and tell you, I'll do what you tell me. Then you're not in heaven. You're living in a manipulation. And so manipulation means we must understand, A, we've been programmed, and B, we can change the program. So, because if you can't change the program, then we're stuck in the pathway that people repeat over and over again. That's a habit. And the only way out is to change the program. You got to know who you are. Self-empowerment. And you got to love yourself. And well, 80% of the people in any group that we test, a group for the belief statement, I love myself. Fact. 80% or more of the people will not test positive for that statement. I say, well, why is that important? It's like, well, if you can't love yourself, just be logical for a second. If you can't love yourself, how can anybody else love you? If somebody loves you, you'd have to look at them and say, well, who the hell are they? I can't love myself and they love me. They have no quality standard. Right. I have a quality standard. I don't love me. Right. And so the biggest issue, the first issue, number one, you cannot get into a relationship with another person or even into any career, anything you want to do, if you do not love yourself, because then your unconscious behavior will go about the process of sabotaging anything you do to prove why you're unlovable. And so you unconsciously sabotage ourselves. And we have been doing this, and we have been programmed by other people. I am very, when you get me going, we don't want to do it right now because I need to close down. But, the church, for the longest time, as a biologist, and I go back and I say, oh my God, these guys knew the control mechanism. And they control the world with it. Right. And they just evolved it to another level. The church never really ended because the church was owned by a bunch of people. And the owners of the church are now just owning the pharmaceutical industry too. So the same people are always there. It's a story of rich dad, poor dad.
Right.
And it says you come from a poor family, you'll be programmed to stay poor. You come from a rich family, you got programmed to stay rich. Well, we all have this opportunity.
Well, I think it's a really good opportunity too. And like most opportunities, they come about because we have our backs against the wall, and there's no way out but to take advantage of this opportunity.
Yeah, but there is. Once you start to take back the power, once you know how you've been programmed, you are free to change the programming. If the programming's invisible, which it is for almost everybody, then they look at the world like, oh, events are happening to me. And it's like, no. We are creating this with our complicity with the existing structure because of our programming to comply.
Right.
And so then we're encouraging. Until you change that belief, this thing stays. But as we talked about, the millennials, group of people with a different set of beliefs.
Well, let's hope they read Biology of Belief and your latest book. But Spontaneous Evolution was really good too, by the way.
I appreciate that very much. Actually, I like that one of the best of all. But it's for people, it's like, oh, it's too thick. It's like,
right. I know, and that's true too. They're telling, like, I'm thinking about writing another book, and they say, well, write a small one. This is what people are starting to like, is smaller books.
Honeymoon Effect, much smaller and easier to read.
Yeah, it is. It's a page turner. All right, Bruce, I'm going to let you go. And again, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. I want to thank you so very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to your community. And I want to thank your community for being open enough to listen, because that is the first sign of evolution.
Well, know this. Dara and I love you and Margaret dearly and really appreciate you.
And we appreciate you and everyone out there. So thank you again, and thank you so much, and look forward to do it in the future and see how evolution is progressing.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
You take care, Bruce.